Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A broad topic, let's learn. What's the creepiest thing that you've ever seen? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
Finding my dad dead in his recliner, I swear I heard his voice when the coroner came for his body. When I was about 12, I was sleeping on my trampoline with a friend, and we heard the bushes move behind us and flashed our flashlight to the bushes, and a mountain lion was laying there stalking us. I never ran so fast in my life. My brother after his overdose. Dude looked like a translucent bluish red color covered in his own puke, jaw tensed shut. My dad and I thought he was dead, but we worked on him anyway. Pretty sure I chipped some of his teeth, prying his mouth open. I cleared his airway. Me and my dad traded compressions until he sent me outside to flag down the ambulance. And that effing goober survived. He's been sober from hard drugs for 7+ years, sober from drinking for 5+, 2 beautiful daughters and a wife. When I was serving my time as an engineer in the Merchant Navy, we used to have to clean out what are called sea chests. They're basically big filters for seawater that we would pump in to use as coolant, and if the pumps were on when we were dockside, we'd find all sorts of things like bottles, fish, crabs, etc. One day, we opened up the chest, pulled out the filter, and immediately saw this gold shiny thing, which turned out to be a Rolex watch. Usually, we'd just dump out the filter, but with the mitigating circumstances, we went through it thoroughly and found a piece of a shirt with a cufflink still attached, and last, but not least, a nicely rotted finger. The police ended up closing off the dock and dredging it, but never found anything on the end. Was working in a restaurant. Nice place. The night we held a charity dinner for a youth in need type of house, the guy representing the house, a worker there, was such a nice and kind man. Every teen there was only saying nice things of him. A good soul that was giving everything he could for these teens. At one point they gave him a big check for the charity. I must guess an amount that they rarely received. Well, under the excitement, that poor man had a cardiac arrest, dropped there on the stage, check in hand. He couldn't be brought back. He died. Seeing this was already bad enough, but the kids everywhere in the restaurant were screaming and crying for hours after. Haunting. I had a scene straight out of a horror movie play out for me a couple of years ago. I was sitting out back with a friend when I see my neighbor in his house. We meet eyes, I wave, he waves. Only one problem. That wasn't my neighbor. I tell my friend we gotta go inside, now. We turn the lights off and lock the doors, then I shoot my neighbor a text asking if he has any guests. He says no. So I call the cops. My neighbor calls as well. Guy was still there when the cops arrived. Apparently he was dumb enough to think I didn't recognize he wasn't my neighbor. One random night in middle school, I woke up and had the odd feeling that something or someone was present in the house and coming towards my room. I was scared, so I closed my eyes to pretend to be asleep. I could faintly hear something come in my room, and it felt like someone was standing over me, looking to make sure I was asleep. I laid on my back, eyes shut, until the feeling passed and ended up falling asleep. I woke up in the morning to find out that our house was robbed. Well-dressed 50-something business dude on a quiet Chicago L train reading a Wall Street Journal. Pretty woman with long curly hair dozing in the seat in front of him, her hair dangling behind the seat. The guy is rubbing and playing with her hair while reading his paper, so I figure she's his wife or girlfriend who just wanted some space to nap. He's now intently rubbing and fondling her hair and not reading anymore. Suddenly she snaps awake and pulls in her hair like a bug was in it or something. She gets off at the next stop. He continues reading. They didn't know each other at all. I was about 8 and walking in a field along brambles with my grandmother picking blackberries and generally having a fun time. The area was walking distance from her home, so it wasn't as if we were anywhere remote. We came across a small area kind of hidden through an archway of bushes. Inside the area and underneath an overhanging tree, really secluded and off of any kind of path, we found a shallow dug rectangle grave shaped with black, burned masks inside of the dirt. I remember my grandmother just saying, "Okay, let's go home." And we went home. Later on, I heard my granddad confirming with my grandmother that it would have been the spot where the guy tried to burn the body of a girl who had been recently murdered in their town. The case had been solved, but the crime scene must have just been left as the whole. It was all over the news just before that, but I was too young to really know about it. I have that photo image of how creepy that hole was to see to this day in my memory. I've always had trouble sleeping through the night, so I often wake up in the middle of the night. When I was probably 16 or 17, I woke up one night, and I left my room to get a snack or some water. In the hallway, I saw a figure and just dismissed it as me seeing things, so I gave it a good hard look to figure out what it was. Well, it definitely wasn't a pile of clothes or anything. It just stood there looking at me with its long coat and grotesquely long fingers. If you've ever seen pictures of the Hatman, it was kind of like that. Freaked me out for the night. Then I checked the next morning to see if there was anything in that spot slightly resembling what I saw, but there wasn't. I'd figured I was just seeing things and got over it until a week later when we were around the dinner table and my sister started describing the strange figure that she had seen the night before, and it perfectly matched the thing I had seen a couple of nights previously. The hush that fell over the table as everyone exchanged nervous looks when I said, "Oh, yeah, that guy, you've seen him too?" was deafening. My dad installed security cameras the next day, but we never saw anything. I've since gotten over it, but damn if that didn't creep me out for a while. I was driving to work one day when a guy on a motorcycle drove by me going very fast. I drove along for a while until the traffic suddenly slowed way down. I creeped up and saw a sneaker in the road, then a blood shirt, and then a body being covered by a cop holding a sheet. It seems the guy had slammed into the back of the cop car and was killed.
I know it's not good to make assumptions about people and, all that stuff, but, yeah, probably might have had somebody in his basement or trunk. Sounds creepy.
I was in a restaurant years ago on a lunch break. At the time, I was a very thin 25-year-old woman. There was this big creepy guy sitting there who would not stop staring at me from the moment I walked in the door. I mean, just open-faced staring without blinking for the entire 15 minutes I was eating several seats away. I asked for a box and left early to get away from him. As I walked out, he said, "You shouldn't be out alone. Someone's going to grab you and steal you away." 100% convinced Creepazoid had someone locked up in his basement. I grew up somewhere very rural, no street lights, and far away from any town with them. At night, it was dark. My bedroom door also never closed properly. You could latch it, but it wouldn't pop open if you pushed the door lightly. One night, I woke up suddenly without knowing why. As my mind tried to make sense of things, I looked to my left towards the bedroom door. I could see the outline of a figure. In the tiny amount of pre-dawn light, I could just see a white shape, long dark hair hanging down and sunken eyes. I could also hear it breathing. After a few seconds of absolute mind-bending horror, where I literally felt every hair stand up on end, it took a step into my room out of the dark hallway. The hallway had no windows, so my room was slightly lighter. The change of the light also changed the face slightly. I could see it more clearly. I saw that it was in fact my mother's face, and she was sleepwalking. She very occasionally did, and also had a lot of other sleep problems, including very vivid nightmares. She quickly left and went back to bed. Fortunately, for my own sanity, I never saw her sleepwalk again. We had a neighbor who moved out and came back a year later for a visit. He brought with him his 2 kids and the Asian woman he claimed was his wife. He claimed it was the same wife he used to have and that she just lost weight and had a makeover. But we remember the wife as a really tiny woman, 5'1" or so, with wavy bob hair. This new one was about 5'6" with long straight black hair, looked younger too. Even she took off her sandals, and I saw even without sandals she was about 5'6". While on vacation, he told the neighbor of his vacation home that his wife died of a brain tumor. I began to wonder where his wife really was. I think he really just sent her back to her Asian home country, but it was creepy to see him trying to pass off the new one as his wife. A coworker explained to me when he's in the shower, he uses olive oil on his fingers to lube up his hole to prevent colon cancer. Dude was giving me health advice because I was younger than him. When I asked him, "Why would you tell me this?" he said, "I noticed you go to the restroom a lot." About 25 years ago, a few days after my cousin's wedding, a large group of us decided to go out drinking one night in Portland, Maine. We decided to walk from my aunt's house to the bar and back so no one would be driving. On the way back from the bar, we cut down a dark residential street, and there was a large guy just standing there holding a hammer. It's like 2 a.m., and there's this large guy just standing in the street holding a hammer. A few of us asked what he was doing as we walked by, but he just stood there watching us as we walked down the street. The guy never said a word. Luckily, there were 12 of us in the group, because who knows what this guy was up to. He gave off some creepy Jason Voorhees vibes, that's for sure. When I was probably 15, I went kayaking with some friends. We came across what looked like a log in the water. There were some people on shore that were waving at us, saying someone was probably trapped under the canoe. They used one of our kayaks to go out and look. There was a kid only a few years older than us that had gotten wrapped up in some rope when the canoe turned over. He didn't make it. They found his dad a few days later, also didn't make it. That image I will never get out of my mind. Very recent story, not even a week old. Weird stuff has been happening in the house I'm staying in for months, starting when I was out of town for 2 weeks. When I'd wake up in the morning after I'd come back from a trip or after I'd come home from a night out, furniture had been moved, dishes had been washed, laundry had been folded, and a host of other weird things, always good things, and nothing was ever stolen. I went through so many different possibilities. I started sleepwalking for the first time. I have carbon monoxide poisoning. There's a ghost in the house. I'm blacking out from stress. There's someone coming in and out of the house. I searched the house so many times for another person and never found anyone, and I was slowly going crazy trying to figure out what was happening. I honestly thought I was having a psychotic breakdown at one point. The pinnacle was when I woke up one morning and all of my trash had been taken outside, put inside the trash bins. The trash bins had been rolled out to the curb, and in all the trash bins inside had new bags in them. Things finally started slowing down, and things weren't being moved anymore, but I was hearing what sounded like people walking on the roof above me. My friends told me it was probably just squirrels, so I waved it off. Until last Friday, when I walked upstairs at 2 a.m. and the crawl space door was wide open. I called the sheriffs, and it turned out there was a homeless people living inside the walls of my house on and off for months, right next to my bedroom. They were sneaking in through a faulty door lock and window they'd broke. S-21 in Cambodia and the killing fields. The results of genocide while occurred between 1975 and 1980. I visited in the early 2000s. S-21 was the secret center of a network of nearly 200 prisons where people were tortured by the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot, to control the city and country and ordered anyone with an education or who wore glasses out of the cities and into the rice fields despite having no knowledge of the land. If they couldn't grow crops, they were killed or starved to death. Those that resisted were imprisoned in concentration camps, with S-21 being one of the main ones. It was originally a school, a place of education and peace. It was transformed into a prison of torture. Each classroom was modified to have multiple brick cubicles built inside them, similar to maybe a gym bathroom. Each classroom housed 30 to 40 prisoners. They were not allowed to shower or use the toilet. Once a month, prisoners were hosed down through the windows. There was also a process of choosing to kill an entire family, including children and babies. I forgot the term, but basically it was the idea that if one part of the tree is diseased, it is best to cut the entire tree down, including the roots. There were 30,000 imprisoned at S-21 over the period of Pol Pot's regime, one of many converted school torture camps. Men, women, children, and babies. There was a practice of using babies for target practice. There were photos of this. From the 30,000 prisoners, there were only 12 survivors. When you visit S-21, you can freely wander around the school grounds, enter the cells, stand in the torture chambers. You could feel the death and pain from the walls. Just down the road from S-21 is what is known as the killing fields. This is where tens of thousands of bodies are buried in mass graves, all of whom went through the torture camps, all of who were victims of Pol Pot's regime. I was told buses of people were brought in on a regular basis, with those who would be brought here for their execution. You were sent here to your death if you were educated, if you wore glasses, if someone in your family did, if you resisted or refused orders. When Pol Pot was overturned, the locals collected skulls and bones and built towers with them to honor them. Giant shrines of tens of thousands of human skulls and bones are erected there. Parts of the killing fields were still littered with bones and clothing that they wore when executed. You could see patches of dirt where the wind and rain had eroded away, with bones, clothing, and items visible in the dirt. This whole experience was one of the most humbling yet terrifying things I've seen that occurred on this planet, and I still sometimes can't believe these atrocities occurred in my lifetime. My boyfriend in college sat bolt upright in his sleep and said, "Don't look. If you make eye contact with it, it will kill us both." Then he fell back down, still asleep. Damn near peed myself. A few months ago, we were at a relative's house. When we were going back home at 2 to 3 a.m., we saw a guy covered head to toe in blood walking, or at least trying to. He started signaling, but we didn't stop because we didn't know what to do. We immediately called the cops and told them what we've seen. They said lock the doors and windows and don't stop. Then they kept calling us back, asking about the exact location. They called us back over 5 times and they never found him. When I was a kid, I went to this daycare, and every once in a while, we'd walk to the swimming pool. During our walk, we had to pass some houses. There was a really old lady in one of them that would lay in her yard, bushes, and front steps and pretend to be passed out or dead. In Baghdad almost 20 years ago, I was working alone at night with a busted up small dozer with one swinging headlight. I would get off from time to time and do shovel work. One time I noticed a bunch of eyes glowing off in the distance, like 5 or 6 sets, just staring at me. I didn't think too much about it and went on working. After a few minutes, I picked my head up again and noticed the eyes were still there, but closer. I wasn't sure if they were harmless or what, so I continued working, but I didn't turn my back to them. After a few more minutes, I picked my head up again and they're gone. Sweet. Now I don't need to have to be concerned, I thought. I worked a few more minutes and looked up and noticed all the eyes again, but they had moved around from the first side and were behind me, and close enough I could now make out what they were doing in the blackness with the one single swinging dim headlight. They were a pack of feral dogs, looking at me like I would make a good meal. They were standing on a berm I had made, maybe 4 feet high. I grabbed a big dirt clod and charged at them, yelling as I ran, and I tossed the clod in their direction. They didn't flinch. Oh shit, I thought. So I got back onto the dozer and take off towards them with it. I get closer and start going up the berm, and only then do they start walking briskly away. However, they stopped a short distance away and started. Luckily, shortly after, another dump truck came by, and I got a ride out of there. I travel to London for work occasionally. It was a busy morning, rush hour, and hundreds of people were walking over London Bridge, zoned out on their commute. I looked down into the River Thames and saw a police boat driving toward this floating object. Then they just pulled the body up and into their boat and sped off. I felt like I was the only person who'd even noticed it. First time I'd seen a dead body. I was hiking outside of Vancouver in a densely wooded area known to have many cougars, mountain lions. I had my dog with me, who was a huge, tall thing, part Irish wolfhound and fiercely loyal. We had been hiking for about an hour and were far enough back by then that we hadn't seen anyone else in quite some time. I stopped at a log to take a short break. We'd been sitting there for about 5 minutes when my dog starts going stiff, hackles up, and starts growling while staring into the dense brush. I stare into the woods, but can't see anything at all. It's gone quiet though. That's kind of eerie silence the forest takes on sometimes. The dog is still growling, looking at the spot about 6 feet off the ground. I decide it's time to get out of there and take up a quick pace back the way we came. The dog checked behind us. We get about 15 minutes down the path when he stops again, facing the woods along the path, and barks a sharp 3 or 4 times, then resumes growling intensely. I keep moving, and he sort of stiff-legged walks a few steps, stops, and growls, catches up to me, walks a few more steps, growling, etc. He occasionally barks. I cannot for the life of me see anything in the woods. No movement, no animals, nothing. The whole hike back goes like that. I never see a thing. Once we reach the bridge and more people, my dog finally relaxes and stops growling or barking, but he's still keen to get out of there. I've always assumed it was a cougar stalking us. We never went back there. You know how your parents always warned you about guys asking for directions? And you never thought it would happen to you, so of course you said, yeah, I'll never get it. And just don't think about it? Well, it happened to me once. I was 15 and taking a walk through my relatively safe neighborhood when a guy in an old truck pulls up and asks for directions. I pointed him to the next street over, and he asked me to get in the car with him. Luckily, I was right by my backyard, so I cut through the bushes and beelined it inside. Called my dad to make sure he was coming home, and I wouldn't be alone for long. Never saw the man again, but it was incredibly creepy, and it was a while before I took the walks alone after that. I used to work with a lady that was involved in a rehab program, which allows her to go out for a certain time. She couldn't drive or have her own cell phone, so she has a designated driver that would pick her up and drop her off at specific times. Apparently, her driver is a weirdo groomer because he wouldn't stop bothering her and has offered her money for sex. I didn't know this until drama happened and she vented to me. One day, when I was at work, this old guy came inside desperately wanting to see her. She goes hiding and tells me to tell the guy to leave, which I did. Then he tries to brute force his way, but fails miserably. Then he leaves a message on a napkin for her and left. I did read the message, and I clearly remember it saying, "I need an answer now. I'm offering you $1,500 to run away with me." I gave it to her. She didn't read it. A few days later, the girl quits without notice. Oh, the creepy part? He would show up at around 10 a.m. at the restaurant looking for her, and I kept warning the guy to leave. He eventually stopped after a few weeks.